because of time, I'm not going to be going over all the other components and strategies, but if you look at slide 18 through 20, those are the other components of SIOP. So feel free at some point to look through them and think about like, what are things that you're doing really well in your classroom and what are things that, you know, you have a goal to get better at or to try out this year. So hopefully another time. Some other kind of small tips is like we talked about in the language, slide 21 talks about brick and mortar words. This is another big thing in ELL with vocab, of thinking about what are these key vocabulary words like exponential equations that are like really, you know, key academic vocabulary words. And then what is the mortar? What are the language that students need to know that we often don't think to explain? Like I see curve, line, straight. Those are words that we often don't always think to explicitly teach our students because they're the mortar that like put these things, or identify, classify. These are all words that we use. Great, okay, and so I think my biggest advice for working with ELL students is explicitly teaching vocab and thinking about ways that you're doing. So like one website that I really love is Quizlet. If you've ever checked it out, I highly recommend it. There's a really fun game that I always do. I would have loved to do it with us all today, but an hour, you can't do everything, but highly recommend it. Some other things that I do with my students is I have personal dictionaries where they also are translating it into their own native language, definitely including pictures. So that's what slide 22 is. Slide 23 is some examples of FRAIR model. So that's a model in which you can have students really in-depth look at vocab. We'll see if we can do one little quick activity. So if you all, I know I'm moving fast, sorry, my pacing is always so bad. But if you go to slide 24, there is a FRAIR model. And so sometimes I like to do guessing games with FRAIR model. So I'm gonna let you try to guess what vocab, and often I do this not at the beginning, but like at the end as a review, is I use FRAIR model to have them try to guess what the vocab word is. So let's see if folks can guess what word I'm talking about in slide 24. People get it right away. Energy. You must be hanging out with all math teachers. Great. So that's some other things. Some other things is in the classroom. When I was in person, I did word walls. So I constantly had word walls, or on assignment, sometimes I'd have word banks. I've actually been doing virtual word walls with my candidates. So I actually just have a slide deck that I use as my virtual word wall. I had them create it. And then when we get to new things, I had the students research key like concepts, and then they're presenting throughout the quarter when we come up to that. So that's one way I've translated doing an in-person word wall to a virtual word wall with my students. Slide 26 shows I mostly worked with newcomer students, so students who are new to the US. So things that I did is I had a graphic organizer that they would fill in around plotting points. And then I had an anchor chart in my classroom that I made with students that was up for them. And then sometimes in person, I would even do TPR where they were physically moving and using language and telling them where to move from my graph that I had taped to my classroom. The janitor did not love me, but I still did it. Great, and I'm at the end, so I think just some last couple parting things is trying with language, thinking about cultural language differences, trying to include multilingual resources in your classroom. So I have linked on 28 and 29, just different resources. And then 30, I have just a lot of other tips of working with ELL students. Like anytime I show videos, I always use subtitles. That can go a long way. I try to have as much multiple representations. I use sentence stems with my students. I use a lot of manipulatives, and I really encourage them to use their native language. For me, that's a really big one. And I also focus on students' mathematical reasoning, not their correct grammar use of language. That's not, while students are learning English in my class, my focus is not on if they're saying things grammatically correct. My focus is on how are they reasoning and making sense of mathematics.